Dads don't wear hoodies. You ever notice this? I'm serious. I only realized this recently because I've been noticing some older men in hoodies, and it makes me cringe. I am not proud of that, but I have a visceral reaction to it. I grew up in a time where adults seemed to have a uniform. My dad was a pretty blue-collar guy. He never wore a suit and tie to work, but if it was chilly, he wore a crew neck. And every TV dad wore the exact same thing. Crew neck, maybe a cardigan. And it's got me thinking, are we going to fast forward in 20 years and at Thanksgiving dinner, Grandpa's wearing a Fear of God hoodie? I really don't know why this bothers me so much, but it does. I'd like to figure out why this is happening. Go through the journey where the hoodie began. Once we understand the history, see if there's a logical cutoff when we shouldn't be wearing it anymore. Because if that age exists, I feel like I'm getting close to it. Before we move on, let's play a little bit of a game. If I were president of the world and said every man past a certain age cannot wear a hoodie, what is that age? I have a number in my head, and I want you to come up with that number too. See if it changes at all by the end of this video. And I will give you the honest feedback of how my opinions changed as I began to think about this subject a little bit more. First off, why the hell am I so petty? Why does seeing an old man in a hoodie make me cringe? When boys transition to men, it seems like you don't necessarily make sacrifices, you just make swaps. If you're a dad, instead of going to Tulum with the missus on holiday, you're going to Orlando theme parks and floating down lazy rivers with the kids. Dinner reservations at 5. Instead of sleepless nights with the boys out binge drinking, you're spending sleepless nights in listening to the baby cry. The 6-pack that you have turns into the beer keg. So I hear. You will pry my abdominals off of my cold dead body. But generally all of that makes sense. But what I don't get is why does it seem like every dad exclusively wears crew necks or cardigans? It's like there's some unspoken rule that all dads at a certain age eventually come to. Our father's generations graduated into a wardrobe. Kids wore the casual clothes, and as you aged, you grew into more formal clothes. Maybe you wore a t-shirt and jeans to school, but when it came to work, you'd wear a suit and tie. The backyard potlucks, you'd go as a boy in your bathing suit, but all the men, they were wearing their khakis and loafers. It seems like adulthood used to come with a uniform. You can think about this with other things that seem more obvious. Adults had clearer checkpoints at various stages of their life. Let's say you were a kid and you lived with mom and dad. Eventually, you moved out and you got an apartment. That apartment, you got a house and you moved in with the wife and 2.5 kids and the dog. If you're a super white person like me, you were drinking milk at the table growing up, but then you upgrade to a beer. That's manhood. Also, the jeans and the t-shirt that you wear as a boy get upgraded into a 2-piece suit. In previous generations, clothing signaled something. It signaled responsibility, seriousness. I am an adult. My father's generation and the generations before him, they didn't just get older. It seemed like they dressed older. It's a little hot in here, boys. Let's move on to the history, though. The year is 1930. The United States was very hungry for innovation. All those trinkets and doodads that were getting made in the early 20th century originated in factories. The factories had terrible insulation and they got cold. If it is under 60, I can hardly type. But if you are in upstate New York in December, I can't imagine you're at an assembly line getting any work done. Champion, the champion that still exists today, comes in and saves the day. They manufacture the first hoodie for factory workers. A very low-tech invention, but it solves 2 problems. You can put your hood up, keep your face, your ears, your neck nice and warm, and you've got a nice little kangaroo pocket. You can keep all of your tools, and you could put your hands in too if your fingers get too numb. If we're going to be super pedantic, the hooded pullover sort of exists in very, very early, like 1300s Europe with Catholic monks. But the hoodie, for the sake of this very extensive YouTube essay on hoodies, began in 1930 in the factory. Fast forward a couple generations, and it gets adopted by the athlete. Football players start to wear hoodies to warm up. College athletes practice wearing a hoodie to stay warm in the cold. And if you were a masochist and you wanted to sweat more during the exercise, you would keep the hoodie on. These were the primary use cases for the hoodie. Then, 1976, a film by the name of Rocky comes out and mythologizes the hoodie. The hoodie started to mean a little bit more than what it had previously. It came with its own language. I work hard. I can run upstairs. I can be an underdog and not care. I can still strive to be better. Stallone and the film Rocky canonized the hoodie into the zeitgeist that it eventually came to be, solidified it into the world of athletics for good. In a parallel universe to the Rocky world, there was a couple other underground movements that picked up the hoodie too. In the same geographic area on the East Coast, you got Rocky in Philadelphia. You've got all the upstate New York workers in the factories also wearing their hoodies. You've got graffiti artists and hip-hop rappers. A very small minority of people pick up the hoodie too. One, because it's cheap as hell, and generally these dudes, they want to be anonymous, so pop up the hood, it's kind of the perfect uniform. So for basically a century, you've got the factory workers, the athletes, Mr. Balboa himself, hip-hop artists, graffiti writers, all who adopted the hoodie. And based on my observation, all of these dudes were trying to accomplish something. They were becoming. So when I see a 50-year-old at brunch or at the airport wearing a hoodie, I'm starting to understand why that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Sir, what exactly are you warming up for? As I say this all out loud, I realize that I sound like a very judgmental person. I'm conveying them as thoughts, like I've figured all this out, but they generally just start as a vibe, an embodied sense of discomfort, such as seeing somebody wearing an article of clothing, and it makes me actually do something with my face in this case, do like kind of a side-eye thing. And that's when I want to get to work. I like explaining these things to myself, because clearly my subconscious at least has an opinion about something. And I want to know if that opinion is true, if that serves me, or if it doesn't. If you are interested in seeing if I am full of shit or if my ideas hold any value to them, I do write a newsletter once a week about this kind of stuff. What I find is that as soon as I have an opinion about something, when I write it down, I realize it expands into a much broader cultural issue. And in this case, why I bet Grandpa at Thanksgiving is going to be wearing the hoodie. Why the hoodie is never going to leave our generation. I think some of this has to do just with timing. My father didn't have access to a hoodie in his generation. That, however, is not the case when I grew up. I went to a private school, but if you were a senior, it was such a flex. We would have our senior hoodies that we were able to wear over our uniform. And I wore that sucker every single day. Sunny Los Angeles, 100 degrees. You could bet your ass you could still find me in that hoodie. See previous videos about my gynecomastia that I had as a prepubescent teen. It was pretty nasty, and white polos aren't so friendly to the puffy nips. So partly it was just my way of disguising the marshmallow nips. But for the rest of us, the rest of my generation in general, I bet your ass you will find most of us buried in our hoodies. And I do mean probably in a casket. Instead of a suit, you'll find a lot of dudes in a hoodie. Just the fact that I grew up during a time where hoodies were kind of our uniform, I think that explains some of it. But what I also think is an issue is the fact that there isn't so much of clear adulthood checkpoints in our life. There's a lot of different ways you grow up now. It's different than my father's generation. You don't necessarily move out of the house at 18 and buy the apartment and marry the girl and have the kids, buy the house. A lot of things are different now. Things aren't so predictable, and not only do we not have all of those milestones to check off as we progress through life, there's also less people that we can look to as mentors as to how to dress. I want a villain and somebody to blame, and in this case, I'm going to blame Mark Zuckerberg. Basically every photo of Mark Zuckerberg I've seen, he is wearing a zip-up hoodie. And it's cute, but it's cute in the way that I see a toddler wear a tuxedo. I don't take either of those types of people seriously, just because it just comes off as a costume. Mr. Zuckerberg, you are worth billions of dollars. You are on a yacht, but you are wearing a $40 hoodie. I place zero moralistic value on Zuckerberg and what he wants to wear, but I do find it tremendously confusing. Getting dressed in some way used to seem simpler. We'd put on so much more clothing, a three-piece suit. If you aspired for wealth, you would look at the Wall Street tycoon or the madman exec, see what he was wearing, and emulate that, because you wanted to be like that. And now, oftentimes, the richest guy in the room looks just like my 21-year-old cousin. If you've got billionaires in hoodies, my generation has no reason to change our uniforms. We grew up with the hoodie, we'll die with the hoodie. So maybe adulthood doesn't really come with a uniform anymore. And that makes me really uncomfortable, because I think that means that the responsibility to dress like a grown man is entirely on us. I drew the line in my head before writing about this piece and now shooting this video. A few days ago, I was reflecting, what is the age I should not be wearing a hoodie anymore? It feels like I'm getting really close to it. 35 is the number I came up with. 36 it did not pass the vibe check for me. If I was 36 wearing a hoodie, I would feel uncomfortable. I've changed my mind. It could still be 35, but I think I need to feel what it's like to be the man at that age. Because older generations had a uniform baked in, whether it was tradition or just socioeconomic status. The fact that poor people wore a certain type of clothing and rich people wore this kind of clothing, it really spelled out what you would be putting on your back on a daily basis. Nowadays, I think it's nice to have options. I think it's cool that an 18-year-old and an 80-year-old can wear the same clothing and you're not really sure what that says about them. In a way, that means we are never forced to stop making progress. I think what makes me so uncomfortable, and perhaps this chapter that I'm ready to close in my life, I'm not so sure I am going to continue warming up. I don't have all the answers. So I will leave you with a question. When you are done warming up, what will your uniform be?